Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV UK edition. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Much has been written about the singular John Banville throughout his one-of-a-kind career, with The Economist crowning him Ireland's finest contemporary novelist, and The Hollywood Reporter spotlighting the fact that Banville's literary prowess has earned him many accolades. Whether talking about the Booker Prize he took home for The Sea, which USA Today congratulated as an extraordinary meditation on morality, grief, death, childhood, and memory, that the Washington Post book world felt was not only remarkable, but further remarked that the power and strangeness and piercing beauty of this novel is a wonder. Literary critics around the world have spent the past 5 decades studiously analyzing and capturing in real time John Banville's rise as what the Scotsman found to be a marvelous and rewarding novelist. You read him for the prose, the richness of the characterization, all the better for seldom being fully fleshed out, for the glittering and sometimes mischievous intelligence, and most of all for his uncanny ability to render mood and atmosphere into verbal pictures, adding that nobody does this sort of thing better. He is a magician, really. The Village Voice, in following his rise, observed that he quickly obtained a loyal coterie of readers who celebrate his Baroque prose and ambitious structures, and the Paris Review, in chronicling his trailblazing career in literature, reported that following his early novels, including Nightspawn, Birchwood, and Long Lincoln, he wrote 2 acclaimed trilogies, the first consisting of the Revolutions Trilogy, with Dr. Copernicus won the James Tate Black Memorial Prize and Kepler the Guardian Fiction Prize, and the second, the Frames Trilogy, consisting of the Book of Evidence in 1989, Ghosts in 1993, and Athena in 1995, took the world of art as a touchstone. The Book of Evidence won the Guinness Peak Aviation Award. The Atlantic would argue that this was his best signed work, The Book of Evidence or The Untouchable, which have long flashed a pulpy streak. And upon finishing reading the trilogy, the London Review of Books was so impressed they crowned Banville one of the most important writers now at work in English, a key thinker in fact and fiction. Concurring, the New York Times Book Review has declared that contemporary fiction gets no better than this, as Banville continued to bring the reading world other masterpieces on the page, like Mephisto, the Alexander and Cass Cleave trilogy with Eclipse, Shroud, and Ancient Light, which the Wall Street Journal congratulated as seamless and profound, and unsettling and beautiful work. The Infinities would earn equal raves, with NPR admiring its elegance of construction. More masterpieces with The Blue Guitar, The Lemur, Miss Osmond and the Black-Eyed Blonde, and the Detective St. John Stratford series with Snow and the Secret Guest most recently. As if he wasn't busy enough writing under his own name, Banville in the 2000s took on the pseudonym Benjamin Black, bringing crime fiction his own original series with a starring pathologist known among fans as Quirk over the course of bestsellers like Christine Falls, The Silver Swan, Elegy for April, A Death in Summer, Vengeance, Holy Orders, Even the Dead, and April in Spain, with the Times literary supplement concluding that Banville has the skill, ambition, and learning to stand at the end of the great tradition of modernist writers, as evinced by the most recent novel released in the series, The Lockup. The Times London more recently dared the reader within the singularities to flick to any page in any of his novels, and soon you'll come to a sentence or an image so perfectly contrived it stops you for a moment, achingly, like a beautiful stranger passing in the street. The Singularities is no different. Here Banville channels the spirit of Vladimir Nabokov, one of his literary deities. The Daily Beast has reasoned that Banville is the heir to Proust via Nabokov, and the Irish Times recently marveled at the fact that his continued experimentalism marks him as one of the most eminent innovators in Irish fiction and most substantial Irish writers of the past 50 years. Winner of the Booker Prize, the James Tate Black Memorial Prize, the Franz Kafka Prize, the Austrian State Prize for European Literature, and the Prince of Astorius Award for Literature, has been elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and knighted by Italy, among other honors. We sure are that he's here today to talk about his incredible life in literature. Mr. Banville, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. You won the Booker Prize for writing as vividly as you did about your childhood. Would you take viewers back there for a look at those authors you were first drawn to reading growing up?
Oh, well, yes, the library was extremely important. I was born in a small town, southeast corner of Ireland. When I look back on it now, it's like looking back on the Middle Ages. It was very limited. The country was poor economically and spiritually. But the library was a great, I'm not going to say escape, because art is not for escaping from the world, it's for escaping into the world. It was a great haven of peace, and there were wonderful librarians. There was a young man there, and I remember asking one day for Alberto Maravia's short story collection, Roman Tales, and the one of the librarians said, "Oh, that's banned by the church and the state." So the young man behind winked and said, "Come down to the car park." He said, "I happen to have a copy of it in my car. I'll lend it to you," which he did. So, this was a very civilizing influence, to find that the young man would, give away a book. For all he knew, I wouldn't come back with it. But the real beginning for me as a writer was my sister gave me a copy of James Joyce's short story collection, Dubliners, when I was about 12, I think, maybe a bit older. And I was bowled over by these stories. Here was a writer writing about life as I knew it. It wasn't a Wild West story or a detective yarn or a story about English public school boys getting up to japes. This was life as I knew it, even though Joyce had been writing 60 years before then.
When did you first feel moved to sit down and begin playing around with words of your own on the page?
My Aunt Sadie, of blessed memory, my Aunt Sadie had a Remington typewriter. It was as big as a tractor, I think. And I would go to her house and borrow it. And I wrote truly, truly terrible imitations of Joyce's stories. But that was where I began. And I kept at it. And then when I was about 17, 18, I wrote a little story called The Party. Not a very good story, but it was a turning point for me, because when I finished the story, it had separated from me. It had gone somewhere else. And that was when I realized I could be a writer.
You've spoken of the poetry of Dylan Thomas having a huge influence on you inspirationally. When do you remember his writings first capturing your imagination?
I was a teenager, and I was already a great fan, breathless fan of the poetry of Dylan Thomas. Also, you see, it's quite interesting. In those days, we had so many great writers behind us, breathing down our necks, from Swift all the way through Goldsmith and Yeats, Joyce, Beckett, that, we felt almost paralyzed. And we tried to find different directions to go in. My friend Neil Jordan went into the movies. He kept being a writer. I always think of him as a novelist who makes movies. And I, for a while, was very interested in folk music and folk song. And I bought the 3-volume edition of the Border Ballads. These are very powerful, hard to know what to call them, not poems, stories in verse, I suppose.
Stories in verse, what a beautiful way to put it. When do you first remember feeling like poetry might be your favorite form of writing over that of the full-length novel?
I thought that was the way forward, but I realized that it was a dead end for me. It didn't go anywhere. That I was a literary person, not a folk person.
The Irish Times has mused that one can linger in the lushness of the prose and admire the extraordinary capaciousness of Banville's unique imagination. As you transition from poetry, you've spoken of the great comfort you found writing in the medium of short stories. Were you burning the midnight oil writing them while working by day as a journalist in the late 60s for the Irish Press, culminating in what became your first published collection of writing at Birchwood?
Oh yes, my first book was a collection of short stories. But I wouldn't be able to do it now. Like trying to write a poem, I wouldn't know how. Technically, I wouldn't know how to do it, and the effort would not be worth. It just wouldn't be worth it. But poetry is very important to me. Probably more important than fiction. I never know where a book starts. I can go back and I look at my manuscript books and I can see the date, the precise date in which I started, but that's the date I started writing it down. That's not when the book started. Every book I'm writing on seems to have been going on since I was born. It's a continuum. But my Spanish publisher recently had Birchwood. Birchwood was from 1973. It's a while ago. And my Spanish publisher recently had it translated, and she brought the book out in Spain. And she said to me, she said, it's all there. Everything you've ever done, it's all there in that book. And I said, yes, my dear friend. The thing is that a writer only writes one book. It's all variations on a theme. All my books are the same book. They can all be put together into you know, one enormous book, it would break the shelves. But you know, it's all variations on a theme. Don't ask me what the theme is.
We understand historically you don't like to discuss the publication of your first novel, Nightspawn, but I imagine it must have still been a little invigorating to see your name on the cover as confirmation you'd arrived.
I'm rather ashamed of it. It's just rather hysterical book. A friend of mine said, "What, you know, what on earth was I on when I wrote it?" It was on ambition and the hysteria of the young. Not ashamed of it. I just don't think it's worth keeping in print. Yes, it's exciting, but you must realize, and I'm sure you know, that by the time a book comes out, I mean, it's a year later, and you've moved on, and it's, you know, it sits there. It's past work, and especially when one is young, when it's changing. In the space of a year, I had changed, you know, probably 50%. So that the book was part of the past. But yes, it is exciting to see one's name on a cover. My wife said to me, "Yeah, I don't see my name there. I wrote half the bloody thing." She said, "I said, no, you didn't." He said, "Well, no, I didn't, but I tolerated you when you were writing it." So.
It's fascinating you say it that way, especially if we measure that transition across the landscape of the Revolutions Trilogy, featuring Dr. Copernicus, Kepler, and the Newton Letter, where Encyclopedia Britannica would later write that these fictional biographies based on the lives of noted scientists use scientific exploration as a metaphor to question perceptions of fiction and reality. What first intrigued you about these three to then want to explore them further in novel form?
Oh, I've been interested in science, in cosmology and physics since I was a child. Purely amateur interest. I mean, I couldn't solve an equation to save my life, but I loved the excitement of physics. I think that the ideas that 20th century physics threw up were in many ways more exciting and certainly in many ways more beautiful than what was being done in art. And when I finished Marchwood, you know, this is my Irish book. And I thought, what am I going to do now? You know, am I going to become an Irish writer? Which is the last thing I wanted to be. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll write about a 20th century physicist, you know, be an amalgam of Einstein and Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and various people. Somehow I found myself writing about Copernicus. And again, my dear wife used to say to me, she said, "You know, John, you're obsessed by the facts. The facts are not the truth." And she's absolutely right. The truth in art has nothing to do with facts. It's all to do with the imagination. But so it made for a rather ponderous book, I think. And then when I came to write Kepler, I had freed myself, I hope, from that ponderousness. And then the Newton Letter, of course, is not about a scientist at all. It's about a biographer writing a biography of Newton. And that book's quite small. I mean, it's a novella reading. But I quite like it. Of all those early books, it's the one I suppose I would try to save. For the simple reason that it seems to me that I got somewhere close to writing the book I had set out to write. That rarely happens. I mean, usually you finish a book and you look at the damn thing, you say, what is this? Where did this come from? This is not what I meant to write. Because language, of course, as we know, is a very treacherous medium. It makes us say things we don't want to say or didn't intend to say. So I'm quite fond of the Newton Letter. And then we made a movie out of it, that was my first movie script. And I thrilled to write a movie script. I remember I was paid £500 advance on the Newton Letter. I was paid £8,000 to write a script. It's what seemed like peanuts now, but it was big money then. I mean, big for me. And yeah. You know, the book took me 18 months to write. 18 months, 2 years. The script took 3 days. My goodness, Hollywood, here I come. I made beginner's luck.
Now, it must have been quite something to see your work turned into the visual art medium of movies for the first time like that.
I love that. And I did stage plays, which, I mean, they're adaptations of Heinrich von Kleist. But to see the words that one wrote in solitude in one's workroom, to see them literally embodied in people, if if you regard actors as people, that is. I mean, I love actors; they're wonderful creatures. I'm not sure that they're not like me; they're not quite human. But it is marvelous to see one's words, as I said, literally fleshed out. And there's also a process in the movies which people don't talk about often enough, which is casting. You know, you write a script and the producer goes through it and you do rewrites and directing, and then it's cast and everything changes. It's like a spider's web, like dropping something onto a spider's web. Everything shakes, everything. When I did that first movie, I had two actors in it, two Irish actors. One was inexperienced at the time, since become quite famous, Gabriel Byrne. And the other was a very dominant actor on the stage in the Ireland of the 1980s, 1970s, called Donald McCann. And when he was cast in a minor role, he overshadowed the relatively new Gabriel Byrne. Yeah, I won't say overshadowed. He changed the emphasis. You know, even though the lines didn't change, the whole balance of power in the script and in the movie changed. That was fascinating to watch. And I'm always fascinated by casting.
Let's introduce readers to Freddie Montgomery, star of the Frames Trilogy, over the course of the Book of Evidence, where the Observer offered that Banville has excelled himself in a flawlessly flowing prose, whose lyricism, patrician irony, and aching sense of loss are reminiscent of Lolita. Did you first envision this as a series?
When I got to the end of the Book of Evidence, I realized that I hadn't said all I wanted to say about this character. And then I found myself, you know, having written the second book, I thought, no, there's more here to say. He's been a dominant character in my fiction. An enigma, very enigmatic creature. And of course, enigmas are always most fascinating. But no, I didn't plan to write 3 books. I mean, I wouldn't even call it a trilogy. You know, it's just 3 books, one after the other. Oh, I remember when the Book of Evidence came out, a young woman came up to me at a reading, or after a reading, and she said, "Oh, read that book. You're so convincing. You must have been in jail at some stage. You must have some experience of it." And I said, "No. There are women in that. I've never been a woman. Central character is a murderer. I never did a murder." I said, "It's all made up, my dear. It's all imagination. The imagination is the strongest and probably the most precious faculty we have. Imagination makes life. Without imagination, we are dead. We're zombies."
Remarkable observation. You once called Ghosts an investigation into the way the imagination works, and the Boston Globe crowned it a surreal and exquisitely lyrical new novel by one of the great stylists writing in English today. And with the sequel Athena, they added that Banville has a breathtaking style. How immersed in your own imagination do you find you become when you're working on a novel like either of these?
I don't know. It took me 5 years to write. I hated it. How my poor family put up with me over those 5 years, I don't know. It was really dreadful. I don't know why. I don't know why. It just was terribly, terribly difficult to write. And I'm surprised now that people quite often come to me and say that that's their favorite of my books, whereas I regarded it as an utter failure. Well, they're all failures. I mean, they have to be.
Why do you feel that way, if I can ask?
We set out to achieve perfection, and perfection is not of this world, as we know. So inevitably, the work of art is, all works of art are failures. It just depends on the quality of the failure. And the things that happen along the way towards the failure, which is the end result. Beautiful things can happen along the way. You know, I remember when I was a little boy being taken to the circus And there was this beautiful couple, to me, they seemed exquisitely beautiful in their sequin tights and so on. They were trapeze artists. And one of the more complicated things, the young woman fell into the net. And everybody, oh, I went, my goodness. I said, it's not intended to be part of the act, but this is the most dramatic thing she could have done. And she fell and she bounced and got up, danced across the net. And if you ever tried to walk on a net, very difficult thing to do. So graceful, so elegant, and so dramatic. So failure, mishaps, these are the stuff of life. Life would be very boring without.
Happy accidents. Without sounding too cliche, do you have a definition within your own trajectory for what success with a novel would look like? Whether it's how you feel about it once they're done or perhaps how they're received by readers.
About once every week, I would write a sentence and I'd hear a ping, you nail against a wine glass. And it'll be, I think, yeah, that's as near to being right as I'll ever get. And that's what keeps me going. If that didn't happen, I would really give it up. And also, sometimes I remember in one of the books, in the last few pages, for some reason, I felt the need to quote something from one of the previous books. So I looked up the previous book and I found the passage I wanted. And I copied it down, I wrote it down. And because I was writing it down, I wasn't reading it as something I had written. It was objectified for me. And I sat back from it, I thought, God, that's not bad at all. Mm-hmm. It's really not bad. It's one moment, only moment, and I can't bear to read my own work. It makes me physically sick. But that was one moment when I saw what readers might see. I've said this in public before, but there's a wonderful cartoon by the genius Garrett Larson, which is it's in two parts. The top part is a flower bed with very beautiful flowers. They're all perfect. And the caption is how people see flowers. And then the bottom panel is the flowers. They've all got crossed eyes, and snaggled teeth, and cauliflower ears is how flowers see themselves. And that applies to me. People come to me and say, your book was beautiful. And I say, yeah, but I only see the flaws. I only see the faults. I only see the failures of nerve. I only see that moment, that Tuesday afternoon when I said, oh, I let it go.
The sea moved everyone who read it with just about the same force as the ocean's waves it is set beside, from the Sunday Telegraph decreeing you the heir to Nabokov, or the New Yorker taking a deeper dive inside the novel's drama, which takes place in Banville's remarkable imagery. His technique generates a kind of supercharged sparseness, forcefully conveying the narrator's anguish. Did you return to the village you'd spent your childhood summers in that helped inspire this novel in person or just in your memories as you wrote?
No, good God, no, I couldn't have done that. Again, you see, I had to imagine it. Joyce never came back to Dublin because it would have interfered with the Dublin that he had in his imagination. Beckett stayed away from Ireland, I couldn't have. But funnily enough, after I published the book, I did go down to Rosslare to have a look. Remarkably little changed. Lots of it that I remembered vividly was still there. It was quite a moving experience for me to go back there. Should go down again, actually, now that I think about it. But again, it was a place of the imagination. Why I wanted to write about bereavement, I don't know, because my own wife died a little over a year ago. And as I said to a friend of mine the other day, how in the books did I know so much about grief before I came to grief? Again, it's the imagination, One imagines life and death and grief. Yeah, it was an imagined world.
Just how alive does that place become for you while you're working? Can you hear the sound of the sea, for instance, or see the seagulls? Is it as visual for you as it is for someone reading the finished work?
It's very visual. When I was a teenager, I tried to be a painter. I had no skill whatsoever. But it did teach me or encourage me to look at the world with a painterly eye. So I do see things and I do hear them. Rhythm is very important for me. I've always admired Vladimir Nabokov's prose. There was something about it that I couldn't quite fix. And I read an interview with him, which he said that he was tone deaf. He just, music didn't mean it. I thought, that's what it is. There's no music. It's all pictorial. It's all visual. No music at all. That was a revelation for me. I probably have too much music in my mind, too much. I depend too much on rhythm. One can get carried away. Language, as I said, language is a very treacherous medium. It leads us into saying all kinds of things we didn't mean.
Any favorite example of that from over the years?
I was describing a character who was running for his life or something, and I said, this is back in the 1970s when the women's fashion was still there. His breath came in short, hot pants. I thought, oh my God, if I let that go, So language, yes, language. I always feel like Jacob and the angel in terms of language. I always feel I'm wrestling with the angel. And language, it leaves you with a wound in your thigh that never heals. But I wouldn't have it healed.
With a family like the Graces, when you're writing in an ensemble, do their characters all tend to talk to you back and forth in different voices? It's such a fascinating part of the process and action to hear authors talk about.
Yeah, they were to a certain extent based on children I knew in Rosslare, an extraordinary family. There were about 5 children, and 3 of them were deaf and mute. They were wonderful friends. I mean, I would be with them and I'd come home and I'd think, I just had a conversation. How did they manage that? But they just did. And I loved them all. I mean, there were 2 sisters and a brother, and I fell in love with all 3 of them. And then an older sister, I fell in love with her as well, hopelessly. I was like 10 or 11 at the time. But those seaside holidays, the seaside summers, I mean, the family, my mother and I, and my sister, sometimes my brother, we would go and stay at the seaside for the whole summer. My father would commute. It was a short commute, 15 miles or so. But it's very important to be free in the, I was going to say in the sun, mostly in the rain in Ireland, in the warm rain. This is very formative for me. And I appreciated, probably more than I would have in a town, I appreciated in this little village, the changes of the season, the changes in the weather, the effects of light, all these things fed into my becoming a writer.
Within the Alexander and Cass-Cleave trilogy that plays out over the course of Eclipse, Shroud, and Ancient Light, which revered poetry periodical Pank, painted in the humble opinion of this writer that is already comparable to Marcel Proust's 7-volume A la recherche de temps perdu, published almost a century earlier. Banville's books are as ambitious in scope and as inventive in devising new ways of storytelling. A Proustian project for modern times, the trilogy is among the most exciting examples. Did you envision the journey that Alex and daughter Cass would take through the trilogy as one master concept at its outset?
Accidentally. I did Eclipse and then I followed on with the other ones. I suppose I felt that there was something in the characters that hadn't been, there was a seam there that hadn't been worked. I presume that's what happened, because Alexander Cleave is not a very interesting character, another bore. And Cass-Cleave, who hardly appears in these books, she's far more interesting character. She's a precursor of many of the younger women in my books, all of whom I'm hopelessly in love with. I have a Spanish writer friend, Rodrigo Fresán, who says to me, when are you going to write Cass's book? I probably won't now. but it would be a nice idea.
What does it feel like when you're writing through the different ages of a character like Alex over the novels?
One can write about an infant. Um, uh, age doesn't matter. We don't change. By the age of 9 or 10, we know everything. Everything after that is just uh, it's just detail. We know about love, we know about death. We have a vague, humid idea of sex by a very young age. Children just pretend to be children so as not to embarrass the adults. Children are frequently more grown up than the adults they have to deal with. I mean, we've all had the experience of seeing our parents come back slightly tipsy from a party, thinking, "Oh my God, they should be ashamed. Like, how can they do this? How embarrassing this is." Because we remain children. We don't, just as children pretend to be children, adults pretend to be adults. We're very childish creatures, and this is a fact that's told to us every night over and over again in our dreams. The silliness of dreams, the childishness, the wonderful childishness, the wonderful inventiveness. In our dreams, you never get old. Always fresh new world.
Have you ever had a book come out of a dream?
Oh no. No. But more and more I come to think that novels are controlled dreams. I mean, at least twice a week, I look up at my desk and I say, why am I sitting here day after day, spinning these tales, these stories, these childish fantasies? And I do feel that, I'm supposed to be an adult, but I'm doing this childish thing because fiction is a kind of childish pursuit. But then the poet Charles Baudelaire said that genius, with a small g, genius consists in the ability to summon up childhood at will. And I think this is true. The artist's material is childhood, whether he and she, even if he or she never writes about childhood, it's childhood experience that is the material out of which we work. Because I think it's because for the child, almost every experience is new. It's for the first time. When you get to the age of 5, 6, 7, when you actually cease to look inward, begin to look out at the world, everything is an astonishment. The first time you see a rainbow, the first time you see forked lightning, the first time you see a mother cry. These are all extraordinary experiences. And we carry those experiences with us throughout our lives. And they inform everything we do. As I say, we think we've grown up, but we're just pretending.
National Public Radio and Muse of the Infinities, that in this curious little novel, part country house caper, part allegory, all poetry, Banville reminds readers that language also can be a divine gift. Now, what inspired the creative decision to have Zeus's son Hermes narrate this novel?
I did a stage version of Heinrich von Kleist's masterful play Amphitryon, and Hermes is in that. And I sort of fell in love with the character of Hermes. He's one of the most fascinating of the gods. He's a trickster, and yet he's the psychopompus. He's the god who conducts the souls of the dead to the underworld. He's a very busy god. And I loved the notion of a trickster god, a god with a sense of humor, a god with a sense of the ridiculous. Because, so many of the gods are so puffed up on their own self-importance. Even though, Zeus thinks he's the bee's knees, but he's still lusting after human girls. He should be ashamed of himself. And Hermes knows this. Hermes knows everything. And Hermes, if you go to Greece, you realize that Hermes does represent something essential of the Greek spirit of playfulness, of deceitfulness, of simple gaiety. So yeah, I quite like Hermes.
What moved you so about Isabel Archer, star of Henry James' iconic Portrait of a Lady, to want to extend her story in your own and Mrs. Osmond?
Oh, well, Henry James is the greatest novelist, he's the greatest practitioner of the novel that there ever was. If you look at the body of work that he left, it's nobody comes near it, even Tolstoy, even Joyce, because Joyce himself said about Ulysses that, and about stream of consciousness, he said, I know this is not how people think, but if you read the late novels of Henry James, those last three impossible novels, and as you make your way through them, like wading through damp cotton wool, you realize this is what it's like to be conscious. This is a fictional representation of consciousness, because it's mysterious, it's strange, it's difficult. So I think it's the greatest. I loved Portrait of a Lady. I love the Portrait of a Lady. I first read it without knowing. I read it in the early 70s when I was staying in a hotel just around the corner from where Henry James wrote the novel. So it has a special place. I love Isabel Archer. When I read it first, she was the woman I wanted to marry. Then when I read it again later in life, I realized that she is a monster of the ego, almost on a level with who's the fellow she marries? That guy. God, memory is going. But she's a monster of the ego, even though she doesn't realize it. And I loved her for that as well. So my wife said to me years ago, 15 years ago, more, she said, you really should write. She said, Henry James himself realized that Portrait of a Lady wasn't finished. And he on a couple of occasions in his notebooks, there are notes to see that he's thinking of writing a sequel. And I said, no, I couldn't do it. It would be like, a jackal. I would feel like a jackal feeding on the carcass of a lion. But then, for some reason, I don't know, I probably needed to go in a different direction. One day I thought, no, I'll do it. I'll write the sequel. And it was the strangest experience. I wrote all of it in Chicago. I was at the University of Chicago in 2016. And I wrote it in a kind of hypnagogic trance. I wasn't there.
Wow. Would you take viewers and readers inside any memory that you'd care to share what that felt like while you worked?
Sometimes I would sit back and look at my handwriting. Now, I've since heard that neurologists say that there is a phenomenon that happens, that if you have a task to do that's very like the usual task, but it's different in some way, that a human being can induce a state of self-hypnosis in order to get the job done. And I think I wrote that book in a state of hypnosis. I mean, I would use words that I didn't know the meaning of. I remember talking about when she's having lunch with her vegetarian friend, and she says that one of the vegetables, at least this vegetable, had escaped the ebullient cauldron, which is a real Jamesian formulation. I didn't know that ebullient meant boiling until I looked it up. How did I know? How did I know to use that was the right word? It's very strange phenomenon. But I had also done that with Raymond Chandler in Black Eyed Blonde, my Marlowe novel.
Now, this is your inhabitation of Raymond Chandler's famous detective Philip Marlowe on the page.
Sometimes I would sit back and look at my handwriting. Now, I've since heard that neurologists say that there is a a phenomenon that happens, that if you have a task to do that's very like the usual task, but it's different in some way, that a human being can induce a state of self-hypnosis in order to get the job done. And I think I wrote that book in a state of hypnosis. I mean, I would use words that I didn't know the meaning of. I remember talking about when she's having lunch with her vegetarian friend, and she says that one of the vegetables, at least this vegetable, had escaped the ebullient cauldron, which is a real Jamesian formulation. I didn't know that ebullient meant boiling until I looked it up. How did I know? How did I know to use that was the right word? It's very strange phenomenon. But I had also done that with Raymond Chandler in Black Eyed Blonde, my Marlowe novel. That again, I wrote over a summer, and I have no memory of it. No memory. I mean, I remember being there, and but I have no memory of writing the book. So obviously, I was self-hypnotized.
What about walking in the shoes of Detective St. John Strafford did you most enjoy throughout the cases he cracks in Snow and the more recent sequel, The Secret Guests?
It came from a story told to me by my accountant, of all people. He's a wonderful storyteller. And he said that he was driving with his father in the middle of Ireland, Midlands, a town called Clonmel. He was driving with his father, and his father was in old age, driving with him in the hinterland around the town. And they passed by a gate when his father said, "Oh, that's where the princesses were in 1940." And my friend said, "What?" He said, "Oh yeah, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, they stayed there for a few months in 1940 during the Blitz." Of course, it was a big secret. And I said, "Well, how is it wasn't known?" He said, "Well, my accountant said to me, it wasn't known because the only people who knew about it were the British ambassador and our prime minister and our foreign minister. I think even the British embassy didn't know that they were here. Because, they were supposed to be in London and during the Blitz with the plucky East Enders and so on. Actually, they were. And why shouldn't they have been? The East Enders sent their children out of London during the Blitz. But this is a big secret. And they couldn't tell. So they stayed on the estate of the Duke of St. Albans outside Clonmel. And they couldn't tell the chief of police in Clonmel because he was a very bad alcoholic, and they couldn't trust him. But they told his second in command, who was my accountant's father. That's how he knew. And when Queen Elizabeth was here on that famous visit 6 or 7 years ago, she disappeared for an afternoon. Nobody knew where she was. I bet she was down in Clonmel, revisiting the place where she stayed in the 1940s. So it was great fun to do that. And I wish I'd met the Queen. Friends of mine met her and said she's a delightful woman. I'd like to have met her and said, where are you in Ireland in the 1940s? Of course, she wouldn't have told me. But that's where that one came from.
You wear a completely different sort of investigator's hat, writing under the pseudonym of Benjamin Black, as you put your imprint on crime fiction in an original series, starring a pathologist named Quirk, who fans grew to know and love over the course of Christine Falls and its sequels The Silver Swan, Elegy for April, A Death in Summer, Vengeance, Holy Orders, Even the Dead in April in Spain. What made Quirk hold up as a character for you, as you worked to solve crime after crime with him here for so many years?
They don't solve the crimes. I mean, these people, Quirk and St. John Strafford, they're the most inept people. Nobody ever gets put in jail. Nobody ever gets found out. They're stumbling around. What I loved about it, when I started writing these crime books, I said, I made a pact with myself. I said, I will write them as realistically as I can. And realistically, 95% of murderers get away with it. Most crimes are not solved. The police, detectives, they're just like us. There could never have been a Sherlock Holmes. There could never be an Hercule Poirot. were human beings. I mean, I wouldn't recognize a clue if I tripped over it, you know. That's what I like about these guys. Kind of hopeless. Or when a friend of mine, the English philosopher John Gray, asked me if I'd read Georges Simenon. And I hadn't. I had just regarded Simenon as a pulp writer. And John said, no. This is a major figure. You must read him. And I began to read Simenon, and I realized that Simenon was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. He wrote fast and he wrote sloppily and so on, but those books are just superb. And I thought, my goodness, this is amazing. I should try something like this. And I had written a television script, which wasn't going to get made. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I was so surprised that I was driving into town from where I live outside town. I was driving into the city. I stopped the car. I could sort of see a light bulb going on above my head. That's what I'll do. I'll adapt that screenplay into a novel, which I did. I didn't know if I could do it. I went to stay with a friend of mine in Italy, and she gave me a room to work in. And one Monday morning, I sat down. I thought, well, let's see. And by lunchtime, I'd written 2,000 words, and I was off. I thought that would be it. I thought, this is a jeu d'esprit, you know. I won't do this again. But then I got interested, not so much in Quirk, the central character, but in the characters around him, and in his daughter Phoebe in particular. She's definitely me. She's definitely me. Many of whom are me. In the crime books, there's a character called Phoebe, and my agent said to me one day, he said, you know, I think you're in love with her. And without thinking, I said, no, she's me. She's me. Don't ask me how, but somehow she is. Very strange. It's childish pleasure of telling stories, of making things up, you know, of saying, where will this go? You know, in one of the detective books, one of the crime books, I was 3 pages from the end, and I still didn't know who had done the murder. And I love that. I love that spontaneity, that freedom to do anything, you know. But yeah, it is, as I say, that childish pleasure of making things up. Yes, well, April in Spain came out of, I was attending the book festival in Bilbao, and I was staying in San Sebastian, which is quite close by. And I just fell in love with the town, the city. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. I really did fall in love with it. And I fell in love with the hotel we were staying in. And I thought, I'm just going to have to set something here. So I set the book, most of it is set. And that was great fun.
What can fans look forward to getting into with Quirk next in the lockup?
The lockup hasn't been published yet. How do you know about that? And sometimes, I mean, in the lockup, they don't even know that they didn't solve it, as your readers will find out at the end of the book. So, you know, that's a lot of fun as well. But I suppose I was kind of thinking of giving up because I was getting bored with Quirk. He's such a moaner. He's such a, you know, he's always going on about wanting drink and not having been loved and having been an orphan and all that. I would say, give me a kick and say, you know, go on, it's not bad of it. So I invented another character, invented St. John Stratford, and he was supposed to be the direct opposite of Quirk, and he is in a way, but he's just as helpless, you know. I don't seem capable of creating big, strong, muscular male figures. I think there's too much of the anima in me, too much of the feminine in myself. I like St. John Stratford. He's so diffident. And also, of course, St. John Stratford is an absolute impossibility because he is a Protestant from the, if not the aristocracy, but certainly from the upper middle classes in Ireland. There could never have been a person with his background in the police force in Ireland in those days. Couldn't have. He's an impossibility. That's what I like about him. And I like making him believable and convincing. So.
Do you envision keeping quirk in the writing mix heading into the future?
I'm writing another one at the moment. It'll be great fun. Making it up as I go along. What greater pleasure is there for a storyteller, you know?
Would you pull the curtain back and give fans just a little peek inside an average workday for you?
Oh no, I mean I used to be able to work for 8, 10 hours a day, but I'm so old now I can't do more than 4 or 5, which is fine, except that it leaves me an awful lot of time to fill in. I don't quite know what to do with myself, you know. So I write film scripts and I write reviews and I go out to dinner too often. And even worse, I go out to lunch too often, therefore can't work the rest of the afternoon because I'm half drunk.
Critics sent the same buzz flying around about singularities, from the New York Times Book Review congratulating it as an exhilarating, triumphant piece of writing. One where the Washington Post raved that the beauty of Banville's prose is that every page is a perplexing and enigmatic light, while the Irish Independent hailed it as gorgeously written and superbly choreographed, with Esquire magazine calling it a feast for Banville superfans and newbies alike, and a multiverse triumph. Are we to understand this actually be the final book that you'll be writing under your own author name?
That's my last book. The last 2 words in it are full stop, which in America you'd put period. It's a full stop. I've finished. I won't do this kind of book anymore. I'll keep writing the crime books and I'll do other stuff. But that book took 5, 6 years to write. I'm 77 now. And I noticed the other day those 2 sevens look remarkably like 2 crutches, you know. I couldn't take on that kind of book again. And I would be afraid that halfway through it, I would begin to lose my faculties. I begin to lose the edge. I begin to lose my grasp of language. Because, you know, that kind of book requires such deep, deep concentration. It requires the loss of the self every day. And anyway, I feel that I've said what I had to say. You know, I've written an awful lot of books, more than I should have. Singularity is the end. Yeah. I keep writing the crime books, although I killed off Benjamin Black because I got fed up with him.
Do you mind me asking what caused you to make that creative decision?
I'll tell you, it's very simple. I was writing one of them, it was April in Spain, and I had to go back to previous book because April in Spain is a sort of sequel to one of the others. And as I say, I can't bear to read my own work. So I thought, what am I going to do? I have to get the facts from this book. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I listened to it on audiobooks. So I listened to it being read by Timothy Dalton, who was James Bond. Wonderful, wonderful reader. And because I'm insomniac, I would listen to it in the middle of the night in the dark. And this wonderful voice speaking out of the darkness. And I was able to take a step back and look at the book objectively. And I thought, it's not bad at all. Why am I writing these things under a pseudonym? So I decided to kill off Benjamin Black. But Benjamin Black is so popular in Spain, he's still there. A friend of mine said to me, oh yeah, he's living in Spain like the drug barons and the retired bank managers. I said, yeah, that's it. Benjamin Black is alive and well and living in Spain.
What can fans find you reading these days when you're not writing?
Poetry and philosophy, I read a great deal of. Nowadays, I read very little fiction, I'm sorry to say. It's a pity. But when you get to a certain age, somehow you don't need, or you need less, whatever it is that fiction gives us. I remember when I was young reading an essay by George Steiner, in which he began by saying, old men don't read novels. And I remember when I got to know George Steiner, I upbraided him about this. And he said, but it's true. He said, you wait. He was right. He was right.
After being awarded just about every prize that an author could covet in a career, from the aforementioned Booker Prize, the James Tate Black Memorial Prize, the Franz Kafka Prize, and being elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, how do they weigh out in importance for you at the end of the day?
The things they give you, I throw most of them away. They're usually amazingly heavy. You know, they give you this award, and you put it in your suitcase, you think, no. So I find a way of getting rid of them. All prizes are consolation prizes. I was hoaxed a few years ago, 2019, for the Nobel Prize. I got a phone call one Thursday morning saying, "This is the Mats Mann, permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy. We wish to inform you you've been awarded the Nobel Prize." He read the citation, and I said, "That's very nice." And that was 11:20 on Thursday morning. I phoned everybody, of course, and said, break out the champagne. My daughter phoned me at noon and said, "Dad, I'm watching this live and it's not you." I realized it was a hoax. It was a very good hoax. As the call came through, it said Stockholm. I phoned the number back after the guy had told me about the supposed prize. It was the Swedish Academy. But all the lines were engaged. I'm told apparently it's quite easy to fake a number, but I didn't know that. So I assumed it was the Swedish Academy. And then when I found out it was a hoax, of course I had to spend half an hour phoning all the people on the phone and say, "No, it's a hoax, hoax. Give the champagne back. Don't open that bottle." My wife was driving. She said, "It's a good thing I was driving because I said it's a good thing you called me because I was going to stop and buy a new car." It was absurd, But for 40 minutes, I was Nobel Prize winner. As I say, it's an absurdity. If a writer would be in deep trouble if he or she measured the work by prizes and awards and big advances and reviews. I don't read reviews at all. I don't read anything about myself.
Would a better measurement be those who've come up to you and told you what your work's meant to them in their lives?
That's very sweet because they're always so tender and so tentative. And no, I love that. No, that's precious. But I don't care what people write about me. See, I don't care what people think about me. I don't give a damn.
Do you feel like that's an important independence for an author to maintain from what's written one way or the other about their work? Couldn't caring get in the way of the writing process potentially if they did?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, it'd be a horrible life. You publish a book and you get laughed at and mocked in the public prints. So it's better not to read. People complain to me about their reviews. I say, just stop reading them. Just don't read them. But then, as I always say, you can depend on your best friend to phone you up and tell you about the really bad one. The worst review of your best friend said, "Did you see that thing in the New York Times? You should sue. It's libelous." And I said, no, I didn't read it. I don't want to know about it. "Let me read you this." "No, don't read me any of it. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I don't care. I don't care." As I said, I spent 5-6 years writing singularities. Why should I worry what people think of it? I know how limited it is. I know its small successes. I know the sentence here and there in it that are nearly right. That's it.
Finally, in closing, we know so much of what you've given the world of writing comes from your imagination. What real-world advice would you share here that you have with the generations of authors you've inspired over the decades that's been useful universally?
The only piece of advice that I've ever taken is from an ancient Roman called Cato the Censor. And Cato the Censor gave advice to orators and to writers. He said, "Rem tene verbum sequentur." Grasp the object, the words will follow. In other words, concentrate on the thing that you're writing about, whether it's a stone in the road or a human being. Concentrate on that, not what you feel about it or what it's making art as an objective occupation. If you do it subjectively, you fail. So rem tene verbum sequentum, grasp the object, the words will follow. But there's also another motto of mine comes from Kafka. He said, I love this, "The artist is the one who has nothing to say."
Mr. Banville, as I said at the top of the show, it has been an honor. Thank you so much for taking out time today to be on About the Authors TV.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.